there, guys, and today we are here for the list of what I think are the 10 best years for slam and brutal death metal overall, besides 96. Now let's get started, shall we? Number 10, 1991. What better way to start off the list than with the year that started it all? Besides Effigy of the Forgotten, there was also Broken Hopes, Swamped in Gore that was very influential in terms of the vocal style. Being since slam and brutal death metal was only getting started is why it is at the bottom of the list. Number 9, 2012. Well, during this year was the release of the debut album by Epicardiotomy and also the sophomore album by Abominable Putridity. It is purely thanks to the latter mentioned album that I put this on the 9th spot of the list. Number 8, 2013. Even though my least favorite album by both Deeds of Flesh and Devourment came out this year, it still doesn't take away from the fact that same year was the release of the debut album by both Traumatomy and Parasitic Ejaculation. There was also the release of the sophomore albums of both Guttural Secrete, Guttural Slug, and of course, definitely, Extermination Dismemberment. Number 7, 2014. And this year was the only album Maximi Bestiality have released so far. The debut album of Corpse and the sophomore album by Epicardiotomy being the best album from that year also came down. Number 6, 2008. And this year was the release of the debut albums by both Cranium, Condemned, and Gorvent. Catalepsy also released their EP Triumph of Evolution. Number 5, 2007. Oh boy! It truly gets better as expected as Cephalotripsy released their only album so far. Dying Fetus this year also released War of Attrition. Abominable Putridity also released their debut album that same year. There was also the release of the sophomore album of Defeated Sanity. Number 4, 2001. Oh man, now with the juicy stuff, as during this year and the past 5 years before, while the stuff that came out in between all the years on this list except 91 so far is so hit or miss really that it is either people love it or hate it, despite plenty of good albums within slam or brutal death metal coming out within those years as mentioned. Slam or brutal death metal, as stated in the previous video, was just repeatedly hit with home run after home run. Deeds of Flesh released Mark of the Legion that year. It was also the same year as the release of the sophomore album by Skinless and Brodequid. This was also the release of the only Pyemia album made. Shortly afterwards, however, did feel like the end of brutal death metal's golden age, as everything from the mid-2000s onward again is so hit or miss. This was also the same year as the launching of my favorite toy series ever, Bionicle. A truly wonderful coincidence indeed. Number 3, 1998. Within this year was the release of the debut albums of both Dehumanized, Skinless, and Nile. This was also during the release of the sophomore albums of both Deeds of Flesh and Dying Fetus, yet once again another album that by Dying Fetus that is also my favorite album from this year. And what I consider to be the best album from this year too. Number 2, 2000. This year being the release of the debut album of both Soils of Fate and Brodequin. Niall also released their debut album that year. This year was also the release of Dying Fetuses Destroy the Opposition. Yet again, Dying Fetus is making an album that is my favorite one of this year. This album easily being Dying Fetus at the peak of their heaviness. This year was also the release of the original version of the true slam and brutal death metal anthem, Devourment's Baby Killer. Number 1, 1999. Alright, now during this year was the release of the third albums of both Deeds of Flesh and Eternal Bleeding. Disgorge also released their first 2 albums this year. And this year was also the release of the sophomore album by Mortician. It was also the release of the album that helped, along with the song that came out the following year, help slam and brutal death metal become what it is nowadays. Devourment's Molesting the Decapitated. Well, that about wraps it up. Anyways, slam on, you sick horror freak!